Hey, nice to see you again. You came at the right time because we just put together a couple of stories again. And there's always a use for new ears. The first thing reminds us that we should be careful with ordinary and everyday things. And the second experience takes us deep into the forests of the remote areas, where something really exciting awaits. Let's start as soon as you're ready. Here's a little background. My cat likes to go outside every day. In the morning she follows us to the door, goes downstairs with us in the elevator, and spends her day outside until we get her home in the evening. My cat is not the most accurate friend of all, so often she stays in the neighborhood for a long time, sometimes for a long night or several days, or then she gets bored and wants to go back inside for a few hours. I don't want her to get bored. The problem is that we're not at home at the time, so we just have to wait. We live on the second floor, so my cat's solution is to sit under our feet and lick the bottom of her lips. When we're at home, it works great, but otherwise it's not that effective. We have kindly asked our neighbors, who have the key to our apartment, to bring it up so that we don't have to wait for it outside all day. The neighbors who don't have a key sometimes let it into the building so that the cat can, for example, get shelter from the rain. Our apartment is a bit special because it is larger than the other apartments in the building, and you can get in through two different ways. When you are in the main building, you can go up the stairs to our apartment door where there is a double lock. Or you can use the elevator with a special key that goes straight into our apartment. There is only one lock on this door. The cat is used to the second option like me because we are both lazy. But when the neighbors get inside it, it goes up the stairs and waits there. I usually get out of the elevator from the parking lot 2 floors down, so it means I don't see my cat waiting in the cage, but it barks on the stairs behind the other door to get me, my dad, or my mom to open it. This has been a common practice among my family and neighbors, and it has worked quite well. Now, you know how things work with my little ones. And now, what happened a little while ago. My parents like to go out a lot, so I'm usually home alone on weekends. Often it means that after work I invite friends to the village, and the whole apartment is in use, which is quite nice. This time I was alone. It was late, about 11 in the evening, and I was sleeping in the living room when I heard the sound of a TV over a knock. Someone had entered my cat's building, and now he was waiting behind the door. I took the keys, went to the door, and started to open the first lock. I don't know the owners of other pets, but at least I can easily recognize my cat's voice. It's a kind of rising silence. It's a very high and cute sound, and it also has a certain recognizable rhythm, because I've heard it almost daily for 5 years, and then I stopped to listen to it. The sound wasn't like it usually is. It was too low, and somehow just wrong. Behind the door wasn't my cat, and it's the only cat that knows that it has to wait outside the door and bark to get in. I haven't opened another lock yet, so, yeah, I got in. So I heard it again, and then the door opened. My cat has never opened that door. At this point, the situation started to feel really weird. But the barking only got louder, and I didn't want to disturb the neighbors. I was moving the key to another lock when I heard another sound behind the door, which scared me badly. I'm sorry. As you know, I'm not a very careful person, and during the 21 years I've lived in this apartment, I've looked out the window maybe 5 times in a row. But a small part of my brain told me to do it again that night, and I'm grateful for that. So, I got out of the keyhole and looked out the door. There was a man standing there. Some guy was knocking behind our door. If I said I was in a state of horror, it would be a humiliation. My heart almost stopped. I stood at the door, frozen. I don't know how long it took before I was able to move again, but in the end, all I could do was take the instructions in my hands. I did what I thought I would. I ran to my cell phone, snuck into the living room corner, and called the police. When they arrived, there was no one in front of the door. I don't even remember when the beating ended. They picked up my statement, and before leaving, they just told me to be careful. I don't know what that beating guy really wanted. I'm not sure if I even want to know. I don't even know how she got inside the building because you need a key for that. And how did she know that I would open the door if she followed my cat? At least I'm going to be more careful from now on. And so the cat finally came back home. It sleeps in my bed at the best time. This really is the scariest thing that has ever happened to me. I've never been as terrified in my life as I was then. I still don't know who that man was, what he tried to do, or if he's still there where I saw him. Apologies in advance for the long geographical description. I just want everyone to understand how isolated I was at the time of the incident, and how badly it could have ended without my parents. I had returned home in the summer, for the first time in a year after starting my studies. Our home is just outside of a small town, and the forest is everywhere around. There is also a small artificial lake, from which a river flows, which again flows for kilometers through the forest, and intersects with a few streams on the east side of the lake. Near my home is a small gravel road which is very cool. It passes near the stream and towards the river. It was a long walk, but I got to know it as a child. I know the woods well over there. I know where I can cut through the bush through the stream. My walk always led me to the end of the trail, which turned into a ditch or away from the stream. After that, the deer walked in hiding in a fairly deep forest. I continued walking north and followed the deer through the forest to get to the river, and then I followed the river to get to the lake. It's easy to get lost in this forest because the terrain doesn't take you straight towards the water, but it rises and falls, and you end up completely surrounded by trees. I've spent many days walking there alone or with my dad for 18 years, and I've never seen anyone else in the forest. That summer I went there twice, and both times alone, at least almost alone. The first time I set off in the morning. I walked along the path away from the stream in a steep bend, and then I turned off the path back into the forest. I got to the stream about an hour later. As I breathed my hands in the water, I heard the sound of a bell from somewhere far north. Someone was ringing the bell nicely and regularly, which was strange to me. I listened carefully. I was wondering if it had lost its hunting dog, and I started moving towards the sound. I was going in that direction anyway, so what about it? I realized that it couldn't have been an animal. The sound of the clock was so clear, and it sounded too heavy, that it could only hang on a small, tight collar. I continued my journey, and the rumbling faded away, and the whole thing ended in about 5 minutes. The well wasn't big enough, and the current wasn't strong enough to be able to carry a clock sealed in a jar, and the river was still too far away. I thought through all the options, but none of them made sense. Except for one, the obvious thing, which for some reason didn't feel nice. I knew it had to be a human. I stopped thinking about it and continued on my normal journey until I found a rat. A dead rat. He had a carefully severed skull. It was apparently made of wood. The body was quite fresh. It was still wet, and it hadn't started to smell too much. The wound was full of scabs, but I knew that it would happen quite quickly. The clock's hand had been following the deer, just like me. The ant had been left there, maybe killed there, or at least slaughtered, while I was walking in that direction. At least I would think so. I don't know. Nothing else happened that day. A week later, I went to the woods for the second time that summer, and the last time ever. I left home at about 6 in the evening. I reached the creek, walked to the river for about an hour, and then decided to return to the same route because it was already late and it was raining quite heavily. The sun was setting at 9 o'clock. I walked as fast as I could. The sound of rain in the trees was completely unreal. I had barely none. I was wandering in the middle of nowhere for a while, and I looked through the openest area of the forest. When I bumped into something heavy, the smell was terrible. It was a groaning corpse, tied to a rope hanging from a tree branch, and it was waving in the air like some literally shitty, rotten smell sack. It was wet, and green liquid was dripping from it. I started to run. My hair had some kind of visible, viscous liquid. At first, I just thought it was a little strange, and then I started to stutter violently because it felt like I was soaking wet from the moisture. In reality, it was from the rain. But my senses got mixed up. It felt like ice-cold water had been thrown on my head when I realized that I was walking the same route as I was walking. So, someone had stepped on a tree branch after I had passed the place for the first time. Someone knew that I would see it. So, was someone looking at me and running around the forest? Didn't the strong branches around me sound like animals to you? I looked around me and began to move. I ran for a while away from the stream and back to the path. When I heard the bell again, I ran and called my father. I told him to meet me on the path, where it turned steeply west. That part of the path was closest to me, and go as fast as I could and say that someone was in the forest. I can't explain that feeling. It was as if my insides had sunk to the bottom of my feet. I felt my scalp rising up, even though I was soaking wet. It was dark. I ran as fast as I could. I was in a panic because the path was still relatively far away, far too far to feel safe. The rain was still pouring heavily, and it strangely muffled all other sounds around me. I felt like everything was longer than ever before. The clock's hand continued much longer than the last time. It stopped and continued again, and it felt like the hand had surrounded me at some point. The fear was combined with a weakened hearing. Someone couldn't even breathe properly. My sense of direction also began to weaken. I automatically turned to lunchtime, but I wasn't really sure what I was doing. I barked like a barking dog, threw the chickens out, and stomped on the leaves and branches like some idiot. And I was on the phone with my mother, who had left with my father. I kept hearing voices, but I wasn't sure what they were. At the same time, my mother shouted on the phone that they had reached the corner of the path, and that my father had already left the forest to meet me. I was terrified and in some kind of survival mode. I moved forward half running, half walking, because I was out of breath. Then I heard the branches breaking, and for the first time clear steps from the forest trails, and the clock was still ringing louder. I wouldn't have wanted to, but I looked over my shoulder and then I saw it. A long figure crawled towards me with its head wide open, playing the clock slowly in front of its stomach. I could see that he was staring straight at me. I can't say if I have any hidden sportsmanship, or if it was a matter of unyielding and causing adrenaline from a superhuman force. But I can tell you that I ran for my life, and I didn't look back anymore. I shouted lies as loud as I could. I'm on the phone with the police. They're waiting for me on the street. Dad, I see you. I'm here. I love you, Dad. I really wanted to shout, Dad, where are you? But I kept it to myself. It felt like something terrible was about to happen. It felt like a man was right behind me, and I stopped myself from looking behind me. My breath shook. I cried from the bottom of my heart, and I shouted for my dad. I felt shivers down my spine, and then something snapped in my head. I just ran forward, dropped my bag, and realized later in the car that I didn't have it anymore. I felt like my phone was the only way home. Things didn't feel real today. It felt like my feet were moving on their own. I don't know if the man was following me anymore. I could only hear my heartbeat in my ears and the sound of the clock. In the end, I heard my father shouting my name, and based on the sound, I knew that he was coming for me and that he saw me. I almost ran towards him. And when we got to each other's class, my father also heard the sound of the clock, and even my mother heard it through the phone. He waited for the car to start, and we left quickly. This last story might have required a little more info about how the journey went back to the road and from there to the car. Did the clock's bell ring in the darkness of the forest when the father was waiting for his child? Whatever. In the nearby remote areas, in addition to hunters, you can also watch out for mixed-breed animal hunting bell ringers. Hopefully, these are just some local rarities. They are not regular residents of the forest. Very much. Subscribe to Whispers of the Weird for more stories. See you in the next video.